Hi, welcome to days 18 through 24 of the Every Bit Counts Challenge on Open Hand Farm. You guys, I'm tired. I'm not gonna lie. Is anybody else out there kind of tired doing this challenge? I am trying to preserve all that I can this month. I'm doing more than I would have to do just to accomplish the challenge. But that was my goal for myself, that I would can as much as I could this month. Of course, in between the canning, there's birthday celebrations, there's Bible study dinners. Sunday, I'm doing a dinner for a new members class. There's babysitting, there's ladies' coffee group. So I'm just trying to fit in as much as I can when I can. So come along and see what I got accomplished this week. For Sunday, day 18, I made more kale chips. I have enough kale out there to keep making these every day, trust me. So I went ahead and sealed the jars, took the air out of them so that they could be placed on the shelf and saved for a longer period. Then I also froze 2 pints of raspberries. I flash froze them like usual. I bought some different zinnia seeds this year and I love them. They're called cactus zinnias and I have them in this red, and then I have a pink, and then kind of a taupey pink looking color. And I just wanted to be able to save some of their seeds. So I deadheaded the plant and saved the seeds. I went ahead and saved a variety of different ones. So I have my own zinnia mix that has the cactus as well as just normal zinnias. So I can use them next year and they will be properly mixed in and among each other. I was able to get almost a full pint jar. So that will come in very handy next year. Now for Monday, I did chipotle, black beans, and potatoes. I did not soak my beans overnight. Instead, I did the quick method where you cover them with about 3 inches of water, let them come to a boil 3 minutes, and then turn it off and let them sit for an hour. I went ahead and filled my jars with the beans, and now I'm going to add the rest of the ingredients. And that includes a garlic bulb. Some of these garlic bulbs were bigger than others, so some of them got 2 little garlic bulbs instead of 1 big garlic bulb, but it all evened out just fine. The next thing I did is open a jar of chipotles, which are peppers in an adobo sauce, and I put 1 of those peppers in each jar, and I almost had enough. At the very end, there's like pieces of peppers in there, so I added those to 1 jar, and then I just poured the sauce into the last jar. And that's just the way I do it. I have before only used half of a pepper. These are not really hot, they're just smoky. They add that nice, yummy, smoky flavor, so you don't want to miss out on these. That's the whole purpose of these beans. But they're not hot because I don't do hot. So after the peppers are added, I went ahead and just started adding these items. 1/2 teaspoon canning salt per pint jar, 1 tablespoon lime juice per pint jar, and 1 tablespoon of fresh chopped cilantro per jar. And at this point, the last thing to add was boiling water. So after they all got their water, I went ahead and debubbled them and added any extra water if necessary. I just used really hot tap water at this point. It didn't really take much. Then it was time to wipe the jars down, add their lids and rings, and put them in the canner. This week, my tip includes how to keep an eye on the pressure gauge if you use a canner with a pressure gauge while you're moving around the room or across the room and you really can't see those numbers from where you are. I take a piece of masking tape, or you can use a tiny little post-it note or something like that, and I just line it up with the number that I cannot let it go under. And then I can see the gauge all the way across the room. If I see that needle getting too close to that green tape, I need to go increase my heat. But if the needle gets too far to the right, then I know that I need to decrease my heat. But that beats sitting there on top of it, watching it for 90 minutes or whatever it is, depending on what you're canning. I hope this helps. Now my beans came out, but this is a jar of my old beans as compared to a jar of these beans. And I don't understand why these beans only filled like half of the jar, whereas in the past they have totally packed themselves within the jar. So I went back to my recipe because I had made several notes, and it clearly stated on there, use 3 pounds of dried beans and use 1 cup of beans per jar. So I don't know why. Everything else was correct. The bulbs of garlic, the chipotle peppers, every other note I made was right, but it didn't fill the jar. But I also know that in the past, I have soaked my beans overnight. So I don't know if that was the difference, but I will definitely be soaking overnight in the future. So the next project is potatoes. We harvested the potatoes out of our garden, and we had a container of very small potatoes. And I know from the past, those do not store well very long. So I went ahead and canned them. If they were small, I would put them all in a jar whole. But if they were a little bit bigger, that meant I was not going to get as many in the jars. So I went ahead and cut them in half. So I was able to get like 4 jars of potatoes cut in half, and then some whole potatoes. But I also had some sliced potatoes because we had some bigger ones that had nicks in them from where we dug them and poked them, that I went ahead and peeled and sliced. But I went ahead and added hot water and salt, and I kind of adjusted to make 1-inch headspace, clean the jars off, add their lids and their rims, and process them in both of the pressure canners. And when they came out, we had 8 quarts and 1 pint of potatoes to put on our shelves. Now we're at Tuesday, where we have fermented cherry tomatoes, fermented honey garlic, and more frozen berries. I have a plethora of cherry tomatoes. I'm sure a lot of you do. It seems to be the one thing that will grow and keep growing and growing. Even when the plant looks dead, they keep growing. So I'm starting out by making my brine. It was 1/4 of a cup of salt to 4 cups of water. So after washing them, I start taking the stems off. And before you can ferment tomatoes or blueberries or cranberries or anything like that that has a lot of moisture inside and a tougher skin on the outside, you have to prick them. So after I laid them on this plate, it was easy enough to poke them with a toothpick and pick them up and put them in my measuring cup so that I could measure out my 4 cups of cherry tomatoes that I needed to put in my jar. So I went ahead and did all of those. I kept stirring my brine to make sure that that salt was dissolved. Now, another thing that is going in with my cherry tomatoes is some basil and some parsley out of the garden as well. What you do is you take a clean jar, and I'm going to add some seasonings in the bottom of the jar. I'm going to add 1/4 teaspoon black peppercorns, 1/4 teaspoon coriander seeds, and 1/4 teaspoon mustard seeds. And after I put those in, I'm going to start layering. We'll layer the tomatoes and then some of the parsley, some of the basil, more tomatoes, then the remaining bits of the parsley and basil, and more tomatoes. Now, before I pour the brine in, I want to make sure that I don't have my jar too full. When I ferment, I use these glass weights, and it has to sit into the jar so that it's even with the top of the jar. You can see it's too tall, so I have to take it out, take a couple of tomatoes out, and then put it back in. And that way I know that after I put my brine in, that's gonna fit. It's just a little bit easier without having all that liquid to mess with. So I go ahead and pour in my brine, and then I put in my weight and I put my lid on. Now this is a special fermenting lid, and it has this little nipple at the top that has an X in the top of it so that you do not have to burp the jar. When you are fermenting, the salt water mixed with the vegetables causes gases to escape out of the jar. And if you didn't have a fermenting lid, then you would need to kind of open the lid every day and let some of that gas out. But with this, I can just put it on and walk away because of that hole in the top. The gases can release themselves. So I did that, and then I remembered that I did not put the garlic in. So there were 3 cloves of garlic that should have been layered in with the other items. It will be fine. So I just opened it back up and stuck them down in there, so you can see those in there now. And I will put this in a bowl because when those gases come out, it will kind of make a puddle around the jar if it does a lot. And I also label the jar as to when it will be ready. The jar indicates that the tomatoes could be ready on the 26th or the 28th. So let me explain that. You will taste your tomatoes on the 26th. If you've never had fermented food, it might taste a little funny to you. The thing that I notice the most about fermented vegetables is the only way I can explain it is it tastes a little sparkly. I make some pickles, and me and my daughter-in-law love them, and we call them sparkly pickles because they definitely have like a sparkle in your mouth. So that's what I'm looking for. So if I tried them on the 26th and they don't really sparkle very much, then I'm gonna leave them another couple of days. And this can depend on the heat in the room that you are fermenting them. There's lots of different things. The yeast in your air, it's nothing you've done wrong if you don't feel like they're ready yet. It's just part of fermenting. Then when they are done, I put a lid on them. I put a plastic lid on, and I put them in the refrigerator. Now, they will continue to ferment in the refrigerator, but the coldness of the refrigerator will dramatically slow down the fermentation, and they can last in your refrigerator for months. So don't throw them away unless they taste bad or unless they have a black mold on them. Now, if it develops a black mold, definitely throw it away. But if you just see a skim of white on top of it, that's called chem yeast, and that's okay. You can spoon it off. It's nothing to worry about. It just means that you got some good air with lots of yeast in it that is fermenting nicely for you. Let's see what I'm going to ferment next. The next thing I'm going to ferment is garlic. So I filled my pint jar about 3/4 of the way with garlic. Then I put some raw honey on top of it. It must be raw honey. You can't just use any honey from the store. It has to be raw. So you pour it over the garlic, and this raw honey had been crystallized in the bottom of the container. So I just cut the top off and I put the crystallized honey in on top of it. It's a great way to use that crystallized honey. It looks chunky right now. In about 8 to 10 weeks, this honey becomes very liquidy. It's not thick like a normal honey. So after I cover the garlic with the honey, I again put the date that it will be ready. Now with this, you want to make sure your garlics are completely covered all the time. Don't use a fermenting lid on this. You use a normal lid, which I use a plastic lid. And on Amazon, I found plastic lids with little rubber washers that go in them so that things do not spill out. So that's what I use for these ferments. Now I'm going to show you here what the honey will look like when this ferment is done. It will be very wet. This one has cranberries in it, and it is the best tasting honey. And the cranberries get so sweet and honey infused. Oh, they're delicious. So I'm going to set this on a plate, and I'm going to loosen the lid. And that's how you're going to keep it on the shelf or wherever you put it. I put mine in my pantry. I'm not going to lie, when you open the pantry door, you smell garlic, but I don't care. Then every day you're going to tighten the lid and turn it upside down. And that will ensure that the honey goes down and around the garlics to make sure that they are totally coated with honey to protect them during this ferment. I also usually put a sign on it that says, "Do not move this jar," because it never fails. Somebody will just pick up the jar to move it to get to something else and not realize the lid is not on it. But that's why I put it on a plate. First of all, so that if somebody spills it. But second of all, because the lid is a jar, those gases again are going to kind of come out. So you might end up with a little bit of honey popping out, and you don't want that on your cabinets. And of course, the last thing for today was raspberries. Now it has been very hot here, and you'll see these white spots on my raspberries. Those are okay. That just is like a sunburn, basically. It bleaches out the red from the berry, but they are fine, especially if you're using them in a jam or jelly, no big deal. And here we are at Wednesday with my favorite soup, zuppa from Olive Garden, with the kale and the potatoes and the sausage. The first step to this is to pick my kale. I always have kale, always, always. People pick it and it just grows back, and people pick it and it grows back. So that is never a problem for me. I am going to pick about a pound of kale. I am going to make 2 recipes of the soup, but I don't have enough canners to can both recipes at the same time. So I'm doing 1 recipe at a time. So I will pick a pound of kale, and then I will split it in half. Now the recipe actually calls for a pound per recipe. I did that last year, and I kind of wish that I had cut it in half and then added fresh kale when I made it. So that's what I'm doing this year. So I got that all ready. Here are the other ingredients. I had a 10-pound bag of potatoes that I bought for a family dinner and did not use. So that's perfect because I need 9 pounds of potatoes. That's a lot, I know. The recipe calls for 3 pounds of Italian sausage. There's Italian sausage that I absolutely love, but it has gone up to $6 a pound. I cannot pay $18 for this sausage for 1 recipe of soup. So the last time we were at Lilac Lane, they had a container of sweet Italian seasoning powder that you season your own meat with. So we have ground pork in the freezer. Perfect. I don't have to go buy the meat. We already have it. When I make a recipe, I will cook half of this meat. This is 6 pounds, along with 9 pounds of potatoes and half a pound of kale. Before I can use the kale, I have to wash it. I have to rinse it. I always wash it in salt water so that if there's any caterpillars on it, it'll kill them. And then I just pull it off of the stem and put it in a lettuce spinner to get the moisture off. Now, I told you I was going to make 2 recipes, and I had 1 bag of potatoes there. I decided that instead of buying more potatoes, that would be silly, I would go down to our cellar and gather up some of our potatoes that we had just harvested from our garden. And I'm going to take 10 pounds of the medium-sized potatoes. And you can see that we have different varieties. We have purple potatoes, we have Yukon Golds, and we have Dakota Pearls, which are more white. So after the potatoes were peeled and the meat was cooked, I went ahead and diced the potatoes. I tried to make the potato pieces about the same size. You don't want really big chunks and really little chunks. You want everything to try to be about the same so that they cook evenly. And once they were all done, I added some chicken stock. This is some that I just keep on the shelf all the time. And it was 10 cups of chicken stock. And then you just add salt and pepper. Now, I did not add as much salt as it called for because the Italian sausage mix was a little salty. So I figured that would salt the soup itself. So I put about half the salt that it called for. I'm going to stir this up and bring it to a boil, and then I'm going to let it simmer for about 5 minutes so that the whole pot is warm. Now, once it starts simmering, I'm going to go ahead and add the kale that you can see I have chopped up. I took about half of it and chopped it, and am going to go ahead and add it to this pot. Now, I have to tell you, last year when I made this and I was trying to put 1 pound of kale into this pot, I didn't think it was going to all fit. You kind of feel that way even with a half a pound. You put in what you can, and then you kind of stir it in, and it wilts down once it hits that hot broth. And then after you get that all stirred in, you just keep adding more until you get it all together. And then you put it in the jars. I used both canners, and I will say that my electric canner took a little bit longer to cool down than my stovetop canner did, but that's okay, I needed the rest. So here the jars are, all clean with their rings off, ready to be labeled. I ended up with 15 quarts and 6 pints of Zuppa. I am so excited to put that on my shelf. While I was working on the soup, a friend of mine called and said, I have like 5 to 15 pawpaws, and I was wondering if you'd like to have them. I'm like, sure. So she was going to bring them over to me. And when she brought them, it was more than 5 to 15. She was, wow, when I got out there were a lot more than I thought. So she brought me 20 pounds of pawpaws. So I decided to look up what to do with them. A popular thing was pawpaw butter, just like apple butter, only made with pawpaws. And if you've never had a pawpaw, it's, I would say, a mixture between a papaya and a banana. I don't know. That's the best I could come up with. And they look like, on the outside, they look like they're kind of bad and rotten, but they're not. They're really nice on the inside. So I just broke them open, took a spoon and went around the skin and squeezed them into my food processor. When I got 5 pounds in there, because that's what a recipe of the pawpaw butter called for, I turned it on to puree for about 30 seconds or so. And then when it was done, all of the seeds were released from the pulp that they are in. They're kind of like a mango seed where you cut it open and it's got the skin all attached to it. It's got the fruit flesh attached to it. So running it in the food processor like this released the seeds. So at that point, I could put them through a strainer. I just used the basket to my lettuce spinner because it had big enough holes to get that pawpaw puree pushed through, but not let the seeds through. And I want to show you what kind of blade I was using. It's not a sharp blade. It is a bread dough blade, so it is not sharp at all. It's just all plastic. And that way it doesn't chop up the seeds. It just kind of whips the fruit off of them. So I did this to 15 pounds of them and gave away another 5 pounds to a friend. After I got all of the puree pressed through the basket, I went ahead and added lemon juice and water. It does need the lemon juice in order to be water bath canned. So I was seeing kind of pieces of skin in there, so I was kind of trying to pick that out. But I would let this cook for a little while to soften that pulp. And then after that, I put it through a sieve. It came out so smooth and so pretty. And then you start cooking it down. Well, I tried cooking it down in the crock pot, and it was taking forever. So late at night, I went ahead and put it in a pan and thought, oh, I'll just get it done tonight. Well, that didn't happen. It just was taking forever. So I put it in the fridge until the next morning, and then I started it again. So here we are at Thursday, day 22, with more pawpaw canning and some venison and grandkids and community coffee. It's a busy day. So I started going ahead and finished cooking this pawpaw butter down at 5 o'clock in the morning, as well as putting some venison in the electric canner to can. And I thought this pawpaw butter would never get done. So you're supposed to make sure it doesn't slide off the back of your spoon, and that will let you know that you're done. But you can also do a temp read, and it should be 220. I was getting close, and it didn't take much longer. And then I was ready to put it in the jars with a 1/4 of an inch headspace, clean the jars, put the lids on, and I saved a little dish out for the ladies to have with their coffee. I was gonna go ahead and just make some biscuits.
My cake.
You made biscuit, you did. They all loved it. I went ahead and canned this in the water bath canner for 10 minutes, and I was relieved to have it all done. Now the venison is something that we had in our freezer as well, and I decided to add cumin, chili powder, and smoked paprika to it and make it like a chili venison so that I could add it to a chili and have a chunk meat chili instead of a ground beef chili. So I'm really excited to have these on hand to be able to do that. And like I said, I put those in the electric canner, and when those were done, the babies came. And they decided we needed to have a picnic for breakfast.
Eat breakfast?
Yeah, outside. And we're having a breakfast picnic.
And when they were done eating, we needed to swing. And then it was almost time for the community ladies to come for coffee. But I have to tell you that gave me the inspiration to actually have my kitchen tidied up. It was the first time in 2.5 weeks that I didn't have canners and jars and lids and recipes piled up on my table, but I moved it all to this table where I also keep my harvest. And you can see I've got work to do ahead of me. But at least the tables were clean and the kitchen was tidy, and that made me feel really good. And today is Friday, day 23, and I'm canning peppers. But first I had to hang some sheets on the line and do some harvesting. I am going to can some jalapenos and poblanos together for my husband. He likes to make some chorizo and egg burritos for his breakfast, and he always adds a little store-bought can of green chilies. So I said, what if I fire roast some of those, chop them up and can them in little jars, and then you don't have to buy them, and they probably will have more flavor. So he was all in for that. So I'm just going to go through this whole container of green peppers and clean out all the seeds and the stems and get them ready to put on the grill. I do have some red peppers in there as well, and I will also fire roast those, but those I will put in the freezer, and I will flash freeze them individually and put them in a bag so that they can be used throughout the winter. So once I got them all cleaned up, I took them out to the grill and laid them out in a way that hopefully they would not fall between the grates, which I did pretty well. I think I only lost one jalapeno half, and it was a tiny one. I laid them out, closed the lid, and I wasn't worried about really cooking the whole pepper. I just wanted to roast them. So as they were getting color on them, I would take them off and put them on my tray. And when those were all done, I went ahead and added more. And eventually I got down to the red peppers and was able to roast them as well. But I had a nice sized tray of both jalapeno and poblano peppers. But I will say these are actually not jalapenos, which means they are a jalapeno flavor with no heat. I have this new little chopper, and it has been a blessing. I don't know how I've gotten by for so many years of canning without one. But I went ahead and chopped them all up. And I just kind of mixed and matched. I didn't really care what was being cut with what. When I got enough cut, I would kind of mix them up just to make sure they were mixed well. And then I would start filling jars. I needed to leave an inch of headspace, and I wasn't sure. I've never canned peppers, and I wasn't sure exactly what I should do. So I did kind of pack them in, which I should not have done. So if you are canning peppers, do not pack them in. You'll see later what I had to do. After I got them all filled, I added about 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, and then I added some boiling water to the 1-inch line, the bottom of the rim. And then I started debubbling and realizing that there were too many peppers in these jars, which actually was good for me because I had 5 more jars that I had not filled, and I really wanted to fill all the jars. So I went ahead and started spooning some of the peppers into the other jars. Whatever ones looked like they were too full, I would just take some out. And I eventually did fill all 5 of them. So I was able to have 24 jars. And after debubbling them again, I went ahead and added more boiling water to the bottom line, went ahead and cleaned the jars, added the lids and the rings, and then because my canner was on the other side of the room, I just set them back in the box that they came in so I could carry them all at one time over by the canner. I'm going to have to do 2 layers, which is fine. So the bottom jars will actually be sitting in the water. But once we got all of the bottom layer in, I just added an extra shelf that I have from another canner. And then I could just set the other jars on top of that. And these were canning for 35 minutes at 11 pounds. And here we are at Saturday, day 24. And you guys, this is just going to be a day of drying herbs. Okay. I didn't want you to think that I was complaining at the beginning of this video. I am so blessed to be able to do more and more canning with my produce and the things that I already have here in storage or in my freezer. And I am so thrilled about that. Please do not feel like because I want to accomplish as much as I can this month that you are less if you are not accomplishing as much as you can. I have things coming up in September. I have things coming up in October. I want to do some classes. I want to have a fall festival here. So I need to get as much done this month as I can. I am so proud of all of you who are commenting and telling me what you are canning, what you are preserving. It's exciting to know that I am not on this journey by myself. And if you haven't commented yet, please tell me something about yourself. I love getting to know my viewers, and I am so thrilled that I have so many new viewers and subscribers. I hope that you stick around after the challenge and follow us and see what we do on a normal, there is no normal around here, so that you could see what things jump up every month around here. Thanks again for watching, and until next week, blessings on you and yours.